If you were given all of the resources imaginable, how would you fix the world? Let's say that money isn't an issue, you've got all of the cash and political power you could ever want, you've even got an assistant who will work out what you want and help you make it happen. Maybe you start with small changes and improve your town. Maybe you go bigger and make huge countrywide changes. Or maybe you go even more personal and try to change the individuals you think are detrimental to society as a whole. Plenty of people say, if I were in charge, I'd do this. Well, let's say you are in charge. What do you actually do? This is the question posed by Eden of the East, written and directed by Kenji Kamiyama and Production IG in 2009. Some of you may already be familiar with Kamiyama from his work directing and writing Ghost in the Shell Standalone Complets, a series that itself shares a few themes with Eden. Though Eden itself is a lot shorter, sitting at 11 episodes and a pair of sequel movies, which directly continue from where the TV series leaves off. Eden of the East is something that I've struggled a lot to articulate my thoughts on. I have quite a few grievances with it, but at the same time I can honestly say that I liked it a lot, and that I find it very easy to recommend. It's this short little series followed up by a pair of movies that give you a relatively conclusive story. It's messy, its characters are not all equal, and the pacing is strange. But at the same time, it's one of those series like Darker Than Black where you can tell that the author has very much inserted himself into it. Everything about Eden of the East hinges on being made up of the raw views and questions of Kenji Kamiyama. Sometimes that's for better, and sometimes it's for worse. It's the byproduct of its creator, and that's part of what makes it so unique. Eden of the East follows Akira Takizawa, a man who waits up outside the White House with a gun, a lot of money, and no memory of who he is, save for the fact that he really likes movies.
Taxi driver! エニーロじゃなくてジェイソン・ボーンドライバー
The first person he meets is a naive but well-meaning Japanese tourist named Saki, who nearly gets the first-hand New York experience of being shot to death by cops. Takizawa uses his hod to save her, and they end up catching the same flight back to glorious Nippon, where Takizawa discovers that he's been entangled in a mysterious game in which he and 11 other Selasau have been given 11 billion yen, an assistant to manage their purchases, and assigned the simple goal of saving the world. Eden of the East has one of the strongest openings I've ever seen in media, and I think that's a large part of why to date all of my watch-throughs have turned into unplanned marathons. And I don't mean the actual opening, which is fallen by Oasis for some reason, we'll talk about that later. The movie references weren't for nothing. Eden is very much styled after Western thrillers. The entire show relies on answering your questions, but each answer smoothly leads you into a bigger question. Why is Takizawa naked? Why is he rich? Who is this Mr. Outside who sent all the money? Why hasn't someone killed Osude yet? Takizawa is such an immediately likable character. He just comes off as so earnest and charismatic from the get-go that it's hard not to be invested in him, not to mention how well the show sets up its questions and mysteries, mainly those surrounding the game itself. No matter how many times I watch Eden of the East, it turns into a marathon, as I said. You just get into this flow watching it like you have to keep going, until eventually you're halfway through without realizing. Before I get too far into the plot of Eden, I want to bring up the art style. It's jarring, but not in a bad way. It's very simplistic and stylized a lot of the time. It really gives this upbeat aesthetic, but then when things start to focus on the Selasau game and the conspiracy Takizawa is mixed up in, it starts to take on these darker and grittier colors. It makes the world that Takizawa is being pulled into and the one that Saki and the other normal tasks live in seem like two distinct worlds. Like getting involved with Takizawa is physically dragging you into something different. I liked it a lot, and it's something that I didn't really notice on my first watch through. This is also helped by the soundtrack composed by Kenji Kawai, who I know for his work on Gundam 00, Devilman, and Mob Psycho 100. But he's done far more than that. He's a legendary composer in Japan, and he's worked on a huge amount of anime and live action alike, and in general the soundtrack is very good. There's some very interesting symbolism, especially with the vocal tracks, like later on we'll talk about the use of Reveal the World, while the original soundtrack is generally appropriate and blends into the scene. I don't really notice it much honestly, but it fits the scenes very nicely, and it feels natural, though I do particularly want to mention one song that drives me insane, because it doesn't remind me of Ringu or Devilman or anything by Kenji Kawai. It reminds me of the melancholy of Haruhi Suzumiya. I can't hear one of these without hearing the other. It bothers me so much. I feel like I'm going insane. With all that said, though, I do think the opening of Eden can be a bit jarring for how the rest of the show will be paced, and that's one of the things that's a little more mixed about it. Pacing can be a term that's hard to narrow down. Sometimes slow pace is good, sometimes it's detrimental, and there can't really be a concrete answer for what good pacing is. It really just depends on what you're watching and how that pacing is used. Eden of the East is not an example of this. The pacing in Eden of the East is just not very good. The first 4 are fast-paced and urgent, with the plot and characters flying by, but as soon as you hit episode 4, things grind down to a crawl for the rest of its length. This isn't necessarily something I'm against. It speeds through the panic of the plot, and as Tachizawa becomes more accustomed to things, it slows down to focus on its characters, but it does come across as very jarring, and it causes whiplash with how suddenly it happens. Now with that said, I also won't say I was ever bored watching Eden. I really do enjoy it all the way through, but it's especially noticeable that around the midway point of the show, things take some weird detours. The worst of this is the arc taking place from episodes 5 to 7, which entirely diverts away from the rest of the story for a B-plot that's not just inconsequential to the rest of the show, but the characters themselves don't really care either. Then you get to episode 9 and suddenly that fast pace from the intro is back again. It's very strange. I also think that compared to Tachizawa, the rest of Eden's characters are very one-note. Sati has a bit of depth with her guilt over seeing herself as a leech on her sister and brother-in-law, and certain characters like the detective who acts as an early antagonist have some implied history, but for the most part this is the Tachizawa show. Priority number 1 is Tachizawa, priority number 2 is the themes, everything else is secondary. That's not to say I dislike any of them except for Osadi, who can go fuck himself, but I have to admit that these are not deep characters. They exist to drive home the themes that Eden is focusing on. So before we get to some of my criticisms of Eden, let's talk about what exactly this show is saying. For this part of the video I'm going to be fairly mentioning spoilers, so if you don't want spoilers or the political themes of a 16-year-old anime, go here. Look at this guy aura farming. One of the biggest focuses of Eden of the East is the growing population of NEETs, which stands for someone that's not in education, hey, I already did this. In other words, people who have, because of mental illness, societal frustration, the rigidness of work culture, or any other number of reasons, given up on finding work or learning skills. The culture of NEETs is a recurring theme in Eden of the East, and it generally takes a pretty sympathetic stance towards them, treating it as a failing of the previous generation and their work culture. During the opening to Eden of the East, and during every phone call with Juiz, the concierge for all of the Seleção, the phrase noblesse oblige is said. It's a French saying, though the exact origins are unclear. Literally translated, it means nobility obliges. It's essentially a belief that if an upper class exists, then that upper class has a duty to protect and care for those below it. The cost of your nobility and privilege is that you owe a debt that must be repaid by caring for the less privileged. This idea plays into the core theme of Eden of the East in a very direct way. All of the Seleção have been selected under criteria that aren't exactly clear, but I think there's a pattern to them. Every one of them seems to be increasingly disconnected from the current systems of power. Seleção number 1, or Daiju Mononobe, for example, is a politician and a corporate executive. He's as ingrained as you can get with the current issues, a politician filling his pockets with money. He might genuinely mean well, it's hard to say, but knowingly or not, right down to his belief that society should be controlled by an elite few, he's the perfect picture of the societal problems that the Seleção Dame was created to fix. Similarly, number 2 is already rich. He started with 10 billion yen, he doesn't care about more. He could have already been trying to improve the world and he hasn't, he just sat around and did nothing. Skipping ahead to the detective, number 4, he started out with an earnest belief in trying to make the world a better place, but lost faith when his vices caught up with him. He started making more and more moral compromises, but then you get to the doctor, number 5. He's not like the ones before him. He's not making major, sweeping changes, he's trying to make change on a local scale, and succeeding. He hasn't saved the world, but he's saving individuals. Yeah, I don't know what the deal with number 6 is. No, like for real, I don't fucking know what this dude's problem is. Your guess is as good as mine. He doesn't fit into this idea, so maybe I'm wrong, I don't know. Tachizawa is number 9, a man of the people, salt of the earth. Normal guy living under the current system. Then you've got 10 and 11, a terrorist and a serial killer, both victims of societal failings, like the Japanese work culture, or, if Tachizawa was right, being hurt by a man in some way. It's like a jury. Take them all together and you've got a broad but relatively consistent spectrum of society as a whole, all different, with the earlier numbers being a sort of upper class that has, for all intents and purposes, failed its noblesse oblige. They aren't providing for those without their privilege, and if anything, they want to accumulate more power for themselves and screw over everyone beneath them. Why stop there? If they want, they'll turn against each other at a moment's notice to get what they want. As the opening quote says, "The abuse of greatness is when it disjoins remorse from power." Do you think Gentaro and Mononobe give even the slightest shit about what's happening to the people on the trains or doing day-to-day work? The newspaper delivery boys, the struggling elderly? What about the NEETs, the supposed bottom of society? Gentaro can't even bring himself to care about 10 billion yen, let alone someone without a job. Notice that while everyone else is confused by the disappearance and reappearance of the 20,000 NEETs, wondering if Tachizawa did something horrible, Mononobe must know about it, and his reaction is, alright, I guess he felt like getting rid of some people. Whatever. He's taking his power for granted, and the remorse when he fails is just a distant effect for other people to deal with. Similarly, he doesn't have any intention of stopping Ryo from potentially committing mass murder. He's looking at the political benefits of it. And while I'm on this subject, I want to bring up the opening song. If you watch the Funimation release, this may or may not have been replaced with a song off the OST, but the original opening for the Japanese release is actually a Western song, Falling Down by Oasis, a song that, according to an interview with Noel Gallagher in 2009, was written out of spite for the, quote, hypocrisy of the royal family and his disgust towards the English royalty. Now with that in mind, look at Tachizawa and Eden's plan, in their own words, the power of crowdsourcing, the lowest, most forgotten members of society coming together as a whole and beating back at the privileged few that decide their lives. Eden of the East doesn't beat around the bush about what it supports. It's very direct. It criticizes the Japanese work environment, corporate involvement in politics, and calls the current structure rigid and outdated. I'd also like to briefly mention the use of Reveal the World, sung by Brenda Vaughn.
I saw you in heaven and heard of your glory. You saved our world from the fallen angels.
The song itself has some straightforward foreshadowing with its contextual portrayal of Tachizawa as a savior figure, using religious phrasing to have him stand in as someone who will save them from the, quote, fallen angels, those being the Celestial who have failed to uphold the responsibility they were given, and giving hope to the NEETs. You could make a point that it ties into a larger religious theme with the series as well, such as the second movie literally being named after Paradise Lost, the 17th century retelling of the fall of man and the expulsion of Satan. You might notice I haven't brought up those movies yet, so here's why. After Eden of the East, there are two movies, The King of Eden and Paradise Lost. These are, for better or worse, just more of Eden. They continue the story almost immediately and share identical art, writing, and for all intents and purposes, you haven't finished the show if you didn't watch these. These are not optional additions. And to be entirely blunt, I'm not a huge fan of either. I'm not going to go super deep into them because I'd rather not just recap the plot, but a lot of the same issues with pacing and characters besides Tachizawa being underdeveloped all remain. They really double down on the story being more about its political themes than its actual characters, which is very interesting, but that becomes a lot more muddled with the second movie. Paradise Lost's issue for me is just its ending. The ending for the TV series is not one, and this is. There's no strapped third movie or anything, at least as far as I know. Everything is wrapped up and there's a small hint of more to come, but it's all empty. Even if they didn't get a ton of attention or detail, the way it wraps up the titular Eden and its members has always left me feeling disappointed and empty. I think I get what they're going for. It's meant to be kind of a bittersweet, hopeful ending. Life goes on, story's over. Tachizawa is still going to move forward, this time with Saizo Otto. The world isn't fixed, but the younger generation is doing what they can to get there, as has been the theme for the entire story. But for me, it doesn't work. It's a bad sign when my final thought on a series as I watch through it is, oh fuck off. And the fact that Saki and Tachizawa still end up apart after all of this just feels needlessly cruel. This isn't an ending that ruins the story for me, but to be honest, my last rewatch, I didn't want to do these movies. I don't think I'll watch them again. Do I recommend them for a first viewing? Yeah, of course, you need them. And it's still a story worth seeing through. But it's an underwhelming conclusion, and I can't say I enjoyed it really. But it all really just comes back to what Eden of the East is. This is the byproduct of Tenji Kawai. This is not an anime that was designed by committee or given careful oversight for what it should be. This is the raw political ramblings and views and beliefs and theories of its creator, and that leads to both the best and worst parts of it. And in the end, if I had to pick, I do think I would have it be this way, because it's what makes Eden of the East so unique. If you'd like to watch Eden of the East, it's over on Crunchyroll these days. Luckily, it wasn't lost in the Funimation transition. But with that said, thank you for watching. Look forward to next time when we talk about something less political. Ah, fuck.
Okay. Let's kill him. Let's kill this guy. Let's beat him to death with hammers.